Dear students, good morning all of you. Today we are going to deal with India's freedom struggle, the first phase. So here, before we start the chapter, we shall discuss about what is this called to be the India's freedom struggle first phase. Let's get started. Here, the history of the Indian national movement can be divided into three phases. Okay, now we are just used to go to the early nationalist phase. Okay, that's what is just called to be the first phrase. Okay, and also it is just called to be the early nationalist phrase, and the second one it is just called to be the assertive phrase, and it is just between 1905 to 1980, and third one it is just called to be the Gandhian era. And here, if you see the first phrase, India's freedom struggle, the first phrase, and it is just also called to be the early nationalist phrase. So from it just started from 1885 to 1905. So Congress was led by few leaders called the early nationalists. Okay, they are just used to be called as a early nationalist. And most of the leaders, okay, especially those who are there in the Congress, most of the leaders and most of them were well educated. Okay, most of them are lawyers, teachers, doctors, journalists, and professionals. And many of them had studied at England. Okay, most of the leaders they are well educated, and also most of them have studied at England. So some of the leaders like W.C. Banerjee, Rashi Bihari Ghosh, Dadabhai Naoroji, Ranade, Gokhale, and P.R. Naidu, Madan Mohan Malviya, and Shine. Okay, AOH. Okay, those are the people they are just used to be called as the first phase. Okay, they just used to be led by the Indian National Congress. Okay, they just used to lead the Indian National Congress. And here, those leaders were open-minded. Okay, they just used to be open-minded and they're loyal to the crown. So, as we know that after the Great Uprising, all the company power it just used to be transferred to the crown. Okay, and here the company cannot able to make any decision in the internal matters of the country. So everything it is just used to be disputes and everything will be settled by the crown, okay, queen. And they wanted that Indians should have proper share in the government. So almost it's been 100 years. They just used to be have a complete control of a country. Okay, the Britishers have the complete control of the country. Now what it just happened? So the inequality it just used to be among the British and the Indians. Okay, educated Indians. So the Britishers and they don't want to give a proper respect to the Indians. So the Indians they wanted the Indians should have the proper share in the government. So we just discussed in the previous chapters that is Indians are not allowed to have the high post, especially in the government. So it is just one of the causes. Okay, it just used to be think that Indians are just considered to be the inferior, and they are just used to be considered as a superior. Britishers especially they are just used to be considered them as a superior. So they wanted that Indians should have proper share in the government. And they believed that if British continue to stay in India, it would be beneficial for both England and India. So from the first phrase, the leaders they just used to think that if the British stays in India, it would be a benefit for both India and England. So you may just ask that how it could be, okay? Because the Britishers only they just used to build the educational institution in India and proper transportation in India and everything, okay? And most of the leaders they just used to be demand that okay we have to whatever we needed it for the British government they can able to provide it. Okay, that is what they just used to think it from the beginning. So from the beginning, if the British stays in India, it would be beneficial for both England and India. They demanded for reform. Okay, however, their demands were moderate. Okay, if you are just used to say that, they are just used to keep on petitioning, like reducing the taxes. The people from India, they also used to work in the government. Okay, to organizing the Indian government and those kinds of things. They just used to demanding the reforms. Okay, the Britishers used to collect the taxes from the people, and what they just used to do for the Indian. Okay, whether they just used to do the welfare of the people or those kinds of things, they just used to be demand. They are expecting some reform from the Britishers. However, almost everything it is just used to be failed. Okay, and and just because of that, the nationalism. Okay, so the nationalism, what is this used to be called as a nationalism? Born, okay, the feeling of oneness. Okay, here if you see the before coming of the Britishers, Indians, they were separated. Okay, they just have the different kingdom, and they just used to work according to the kings. Okay, see, they just used to make the decisions, and they people used to follow it. Okay, whether it is a good or bad, they don't care about it. And now the Britishers, they are not fulfilling any demands of the Indian. So the people from India, they used to think that, okay, we have the common enemy. We can able to avoid the dispute in our country. We have one enemy. Those are the Britishers. It just used to make the feeling of oneness, and just probably unity among the people of nation. And once they just consider them British as the enemies, common enemy, then all the people, they just used to be unite among for the nation. And the patriotic feeling, of course, India, it is a land for the Indians, and the Britishers came to India, they just used to dominate them, and they just used to treat as a slaves. Okay, that's why they just used to be have the patriotic feeling. They need to release her from the Britishers. Then principle and policy of the national independence. So the principles and policy of the national independence. Okay, after the what are the things we have to do to liberate the country? Those things, they just used to be discussed. Then British in India, about 100 years British took control over India, the absolute control. Okay, almost there will be a 200 years or 400 years British were there in India, and almost 100 years they used to took control over India. It exercised control over. So just like what are the control overs? Lives of the people. Okay, their lives, everything. Okay, they used to decide that, okay, whether they have to die or whether they have to live. Okay, and everything they just used to decide it. Obviously the resources. Okay, and the people, they just used to especially the Britishers, they need the raw materials. Okay, everything they just used to get it from India, and they need not to pay any taxes, but the Indians has to pay more taxes to the Britishers, and made into India the country of Indians. Okay, so here no longer this country is for the Indian. Okay, they just used to think that the country is for the Britishers. Whatever we are just used to make the decision that they have to follow. So in our own country, we just used to be live as a slaves, and they used to live as a king. Okay, that is just used to be made into India and the country of Indians. Then rise of national consciousness. So see, just because of that, the people, they just used to suffer a lot under the British rule. Okay, so they need to rise against the Britisher. So from the beginning, as we know that the Britishers has given the education to the Indians. Why? The reason is the Indians used to be loyal to the Britishers. Once the Indians got an education, they used to be a self-minded. Okay, they started to think, and that would be the problem for the Britishers in 1880, 1870s to And 1880s, okay, it is just used to be called as a rise of national consciousness. And political association formed, especially obviously in 1770 to 1780, especially in 1877, the Indian National Congress formed. It led by English educated professionals such as lawyers. So especially these organizations and associations, it is just used to be led by the educated Indians. And some of the important associations were Swar- Purna Sarvajanik Sabha, the Indian Association, the Madras Maharajan Sabha, the Madras Presidency Association, the Indian National Congress. Okay, these are the some important associations were formed in between the 1870 to 1870, sorry, 1880. And why it is just used to be called as form these associations? So dissatisfaction with British rule. So they just used to dislike the British rule. That is the only reason why they just used to organize it. From the beginning, they just used to organize this association for keep on demanding some uh, welfare for the people. But what it just happened, they are not ready to any reform in India. Okay, that is also one of the reason. Associations function in specific part of the country works with the idea that India should be sovereign. Okay, here in different parts of the country, the association just used to be formed just because of the dissatisfaction of the British government. So that's why they just started to forming the organizations and associations, and those function specific part of the country. And it just used to be keep on demanding the government to do some welfare for the Indians. Okay, and they want to make the country free from the British rule, and it is also primary aim of this association. So here we stop. We shall continue in the next class.